take it from me, after seeing Blood on Satan's Claw, you will immediately want to check out the body of your wife or girlfriend to see if they have a clump of hair. I don't think I should lead with that. I think it could be misinterpreted. Yeah. Hi guys, so before we get into it, a very quick disclaimer that there will be spoilers today. This movie is older than the demon the kids attempt to bring back to life. It was directed by Piers Haggard, somebody I had never heard of until I started planning this review, and looking on his filmography I don't recognise any of his other works, though I do note that he did a TV film called The Quatermass Conclusion, which was presumably an attempt to finish that whole saga off. I do like the Quatermass movies, although I've never seen the TV serials for that, and I probably should, because a lot of people say that they are as good as the movies. Now, when it comes to Blood on Satan's Claw, I have seen it once before, about 3 years ago. I did a little mini review of it on the channel, and I remember thinking at the time that I would like to one day do a fuller review of the film, and given that I've just got the Blu-ray for this Christmas gone, well, now seemed like the ideal time. Now, if you look around on the wiki page for this, you will learn that this is apparently considered to be one of 3 key folk horror movies of the early 70s, the other 2 being The Witchfinder General and The Wicker Man. Would it be fair to suggest that Blood on Satan's Claw is the least known of those 3? You can be damn sure that The Wicker Man is the most known of the 3, although it's also the only one of the 3 I've still not seen. The Wicker Man is actually probably one of the most famous horror films I've never seen, and the main reason for that is that I know what the ending is, so it's always been a case of, well, do I really want to spend an hour and a half sitting through it just to get to that ending? I know, I'll sit through it at least once, one day. But when it comes to Blood on Satan's Claw, got a very interesting plot here. It can feel a little bit disjointed the first time you watch it, although that is mostly down to the fact that this was originally intended to be an anthology film with 3 separate stories, only loosely connected. But even though the plot and the script has been rejigged to just make it one standalone film, you can still see that a lot of the characters and subplots in this are only kind of loosely shackled together. There's only really one character in this that just holds it all into one firm narrative. So it's basically about a demonic virus that gets into this small hamlet in medieval England. It starts infecting the local kids especially. They start turning into murderers and rapists, and they start hanging out well away from the village, and their intention is to bring back the demon behemoth, and it's kind of up to the local adults to stop them ultimately. Now, there are quite a few notable actors in this, well, 3 that I'm going to mention. Let's not over-exaggerate. The most obvious place to start would be with Linda Hayden, who plays the ringleader of the evil kids. She's very memorable in this. And then there's Patrick Wymark, who I've mostly seen playing villains and slime balls, and for at least half of this film I thought he was just playing to type again, but he actually turns good in the second half of this, which really surprised me. He almost becomes the hero of the film in the final act. And I'd also like to mention Barry Andrews, who's playing the main role here. This guy still doesn't have a wiki page, which is absolutely crazy. Somebody needs to sort that out, because this guy was a really good actor back in his time. I mostly know him from Dracula Has Risen from the Grave, where he was absolutely the standout, but I've seen him in other stuff as well. I've seen him in TV stuff, and he's playing a decent role here, although I still think he was much better in that one Dracula film he did. His role here reminds me of Peregrine from Lord of the Rings, with his massive afro and socks almost up to his kneecaps. I can just imagine him sort of skipping through the Shire, just waving at people and looking forward to his evening ale. Having now seen this film twice in 3 years, I've got to say that had it been made in a more conventional way, it wouldn't have anywhere near the same amount of charm. It's just so random, this film, for most of its running time. It might get a lot of comparisons with things like The Witchfinder General and what was that other one again? But I think a more fitting companion piece to this would be Robert Eggers' The Witch. I know that was made in a completely different decade and is set in a completely different country, but it still has that same kind of remote farmland, rural life where the adults are just going about their business, sowing crops. The children are playing in the woods, but all the time there's this queerness in the air and you're not sure who's been infected by what. But in the case of Blood on Satan's Claw, there's so much about this film which I think is just deliberately left unexplainable. I think you could go through this several times with a pen and paper and still not be able to fully connect the dots as to who gets the disease when in the film and which characters are meant to be doing what. But I think that is deliberate on the part of the filmmakers. But take the beginning of the film, for example. It's very obvious how Angel Blake gets the disease. She picks that thing out of the soil and presumably she passes it on to some of her friends. But there's another attractive young blonde lady in the beginning, and I don't have a clue how she gets the disease. She goes to stay at her boyfriend's house, but she ends up staying in the attic because the parents are there and they don't want the two youngsters sleeping together. But this young woman, she seems perfectly fine until about around about midnight. She suddenly goes completely crazy for no reason at all, seemingly. I think she spots something in the corner of the room, God knows what, but she just completely loses it, and seemingly she has this weird demonic disease now, but I've no idea how she could have got it, because I don't see how it could have got into this particular house at this point. Answers on a postcard, please. But this attic room comes to the forefront again later on, because the Barry Andrews character is lying on a bed in there. I think it's the same attic, and he seems to just teleport from there to the clearing where all the kids are hanging out, but that's quite a way away, and I don't see how he could have got there conventionally on foot. I guess it's just like the juju in the air causing these strange events to happen. But elsewhere in the movie there are characters who are in the plot and then they sort of disappear, and there are other characters who just come into the plot out of nowhere. Now, a lot of this is down to the film's origins as an anthology, but I think it's also off-putting in a way because of the fact that there's no establishing shot early on of this village. We never get to see a scene where all the houses are on this one street and there's whatever passes for a bar, and we'd get to see roughly how many adults and kids there are in total. There's not that scene that could piece it all together for us to give us an idea of what this community is truly about. So all the way through the film we're just left to guess what this place is like. We only really see scenes in the woods or in the interiors of the houses. Very late on there's one scene where you can see sort of some houses in the background, but for the most part we're sort of invited to guess how many people we're talking about here. And I don't know if it's deliberate, but if it wasn't, and it's just a case that they couldn't find a suitable location to show a village, then I think it was a happy accident, because it's another one of those things that just keeps you off balance in this movie, I think. But there's a random priest character in this who is part of the plot and then just seems to disappear. Patrick Wymart disappears for half the movie only to come back again, and conversely there are other characters who just come into the thing out of nowhere. Like after about an hour we suddenly see these four adults running through the woods chasing this girl called Margaret. I'm thinking, where did you come from again? I guess you've just sort of been in the village and we've not seen you up to this point. There's an old couple who are sort of hanging out with the kids. Like all the sort of villains are kids apart from this one couple, this granny and granddad, who were just randomly there. So I'm guessing this disease affects only the very young and the very old, which is because these two older people are there. But I sort of like that little detail. Not only is it creepy, but it just stops the film feeling like an offshoot of like Village of the Damned or whatever. Late on in the thing, there's this random girl who just starts doing this naked jig in front of Barry Andrews, and I'm thinking, I'm certain you've only just appeared in the film, or I would have remembered you. But even though so much of this film it just feels so random, one very consistent thing about the whole thing is the scenery, which is utterly magnificent. Like, this came out in the same sort of era as all those Hammer films and Amicus films, and I've seen all of those. None of them look as good as this in terms of the outdoor shooting. They found some fantastic places to shoot here, and there's so many great long shots. Even when you can't see into the distance. It's just like a scene in a little clearing or a patch of woods. It just looks so good. So supposedly this film was shot in the Chiltern Hills of Oxfordshire with some backup shooting in Berkshire. But whoever did the location scouting, I hope they were suitably paid, because this film is so good to look at. I often look up where British films are shot, because I'm just generally curious about that, being British myself. I don't often see the word Oxfordshire on my research travels, but more films should shoot in this part of the country. I've only been to Oxford once myself. It wasn't to go to the university, before you ask. I'm not smart enough for that. But Berkshire pops up a little bit more. Berkshire and Hertfordshire are two that often get mentioned in terms of where British films are shot, but not so much Oxfordshire. But by God, this film looks absolutely fantastic, and not just for one or two scenes here and there, but genuinely all the way through, and especially on this Blu-ray that I've just got for it. So in terms of the things that don't quite work in this, there are a few instances of what I would call non-witchcraft horror, i.e. things that could have happened to people back in this time period that you would just think are crazy nowadays. But the trouble is, the movie doesn't get these things quite right. So to give you an example, and I touched upon this scene earlier on, there's a moment where these four guys chase this girl towards a river, and they want to find out if she's a witch or not, and they've got a stupid way of trying to prove or disprove this. They want to throw her into the river, and if she sinks, then that will mean that she's innocent, and if she doesn't, that will mean she's a witch. But either way, the girl is essentially doomed. But we don't really see the full horror here of just how awful this is, because the girl survives the scene. I think what needed to happen is maybe have two girls being chased by these guys. One of them drowns, and then one of them gets away so she can continue to be the important part of the plot that she is. Another example of this non-witchcraft horror is when the priest is arrested for supposedly committing RAPE on the Angel Blake character. He didn't actually do it. And I imagine that he probably would have gone to the gallows, but for a stroke of luck that exonerates him. But again, given that this priest character is not one of the main people in the movie, I would have just had him hung, just so we can see the horrors of some of the stuff that could happen to people back in these days without much evidence. It's not like they had a CSI lab back then, which could help you out. But there's another form of horror that the movie could have done in this moment. So the script could have had the priest actually RAPE Angel Blake, and then get off with a bit of luck, and then we could have seen the horror of somebody doing a really bad thing but then getting away with it, and it would have been an example then of some of the evil stuff that people do because everybody else's attention is on the main thing, which in this instance is the group of evil kids. But as it is, the movie just kind of fudges this subplot. It tries to go right down the middle, and as it is, it just falls a little bit flat. The end of this film is a little bit flaky too. Like this is brilliant for about an hour and a quarter. Things start to wobble a little bit towards the end. Like, the thing never derails, but there's some awkward plotting towards the end. So we've got this hunting party with dogs and humans trying to track down the congregation of kids, and they almost stumble across Angel Blake's camp. I mean, she disappears over the hill, and then the hunting party arrives, but then they're turned around and sent elsewhere just because they've kind of arrived too early, given the moment of the runtime that we've arrived at. And so they end up having to come all the way back to the same spot like 10 or 15 minutes later, and I just think that this could have all played out a little bit different, in my opinion. And also, when it comes to the plotting, there are a couple of times earlier on when the Barry Andrew character, is his name Ralph, maybe? There are a couple of times where he just happens to hear some shenanigans going on in the woods, so that he can carry on being the main character who knows more of everything than anybody else. If this had happened once, I probably wouldn't have even noticed, but twice he just happens to be in the right part of the woods to hear certain things happening is a little bit too much for me. But I don't want to carry on too far down the path of negativity, because on the whole I think this film is absolutely terrific, and I've deliberately saved at least one positive for last, which is the soundtrack. There's some genuinely creepy music in this. There's like this little piece that plays. It's like the music is just creeping gently. It's like pianos or xylophones or something like that. It's very minimal, but also very effective. The music in this film is definitely a net benefit overall. I think you will notice it. It's not just in the background having very little effect. Time to show you the version of the film that I own for this. Here is my Blu-ray copy of Blood on Satan's Claw, and this particular version is absolute top dollar. I don't remember the film looking this good when I watched it on Amazon Prime about 3 years ago. I suspect that this has been remastered somehow, cleaned up. It looks amazing, it really does, and there are loads of features on this. There's 2 audio commentary tracks. One of them features the director Piers Haggard and Linda Hayden, and the other track features some film experts talking you through the movie, and on top of that there's so many featurettes of this and that and the other. It would take you a while to get through the features that are on this disc. This is a fantastic edition of this movie, and it'll definitely take pride of place on my shelf, but for now it's time to get to the bag of terror and find out how we're going to score this. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4 bloody axes out of 5. That is a super score for a super movie. Right, before I leave you today, we have a little bit of a reading update. So I have now finished Alien Covenant, which means I have now read all of the Alien novelizations. There's only 5 of them. I know there's more movies than that, but they've only converted the first 4 movies plus Covenant. I don't know why they skipped a few and did Covenant. I don't think they are planning to do one for Romulus. If they are, then I've heard nothing of it. So I can now move on to the Alien novels, which did not start their life as movies, which actually might be a bit more exciting for me. This book was alright. It did help me appreciate Alien Covenant a bit more, especially when it comes to the characters, because I've seen the movie about 3 times, I think, and even after the 3rd watch, I still would have struggled to name you any of the characters. They're so throwaway. But after reading the novel and therefore enjoying the story in a more kind of slow motion sort of way, I do know all of the characters now, and I think I do understand them and know them a little bit better. Certainly my next watch of the movie will be interesting, having now read the novel. But I am going to put the Alien books aside for a while and move back to Stephen King. I'm going to be reading the Bachman books next, which is actually 3 books in the same book. So this is a kind of anthology which features 3 novels: The Long Walk, Roadworks and The Running Man, and it's an appropriate time to be reading the Bachman books anthology, because 2 of these 3 books are about to come out as adaptations. So The Long Walk and The Running Man have both been filmed, they just don't have a release date yet, so I think it's an appropriate time to be doing this one, and I'm going to be reading all 3 of these back to back to back, so I'll mini review them at some point going forwards. But for now, we've reached the end of the video. Thank you for joining me for my review of The Blood on Satan's Claw, and I will see you all again next time. Bye bye.